I'm Chloe Brooks, 28, and 8 months pregnant when my world shattered. My husband died in a car accident, leaving me to face motherhood alone. While I was still processing the grief, still wearing his cologne on my pillow, his mother appeared at my door with legal papers. She claimed David had always intended the trust fund for family, meaning her, not the wife he'd married against her wishes. The betrayal cut deeper than my loss. But what I discovered in David's hidden files would expose the truth about his mother's desperation and give me the strength to fight for my unborn child's future. Before we jump back in, tell me where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. If you've ever felt vulnerable when you needed protection most, like this video. David's funeral was supposed to be a celebration of his life, but Margaret turned it into a performance of her own grief. She positioned herself at the front of the funeral home, greeting guests as if she were the widow. Not me. I sat in the first pew, my swollen belly making it difficult to stand for long periods, watching her orchestrate every detail. Poor Margaret, I heard whispers behind me, losing her only son. The guest book by the entrance told its own story names I didn't recognize. People who knew Margaret but had never met me. David's college friends looked uncomfortable, unsure where they fit in this family drama they'd stumbled into. Margaret's husband Robert hovered nearby, his face a mask of practiced neutrality. I'd seen that look before, the expression of a man who'd learned to survive by staying silent. He offered me a weak smile when our eyes met, but quickly looked away when Margaret's gaze swept over us. "Chloe, dear," Margaret said, her voice dripping with false sweetness as she approached me after the service. "We need to discuss David's affairs. There are responsibilities that need to be handled properly." Her emphasis on the word properly made my stomach clench. "Margaret, I'm 8 months pregnant and just buried my husband. Can we? Family doesn't wait for convenient timing," she interrupted. "David always understood his obligations to us. He set aside a substantial trust fund, you know? Nearly $300,000. He was very specific about wanting to take care of his parents' future." My breath caught. David had mentioned the trust fund, but he told me it was for our child's education. The certainty in Margaret's voice, the way she threw around the exact figure, it felt rehearsed, calculated. "David never mentioned that arrangement to me," I said carefully. Margaret's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Men don't always discuss financial matters with their wives, dear, especially when it involves family legacy." She patted my arm with the same condescending touch she'd used throughout our entire marriage. "Don't worry yourself about these complicated matters. Robert and I will handle everything." The funeral director approached, clipboard in hand, and Margaret immediately shifted into hostess mode. I watched her work the room, accepting condolences while subtly reinforcing her narrative about David's intentions. By the time the last guest left, I felt like a stranger at my own husband's funeral. That evening, sitting alone in the house David and I had bought together, I stared at the guest book Margaret had insisted on taking for safekeeping. The silence pressed against me like a physical weight. David's cologne still lingered on his pillow, and I found myself breathing it in, trying to hold on to something real in a day that had felt like an elaborate fiction. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. "We'll come by tomorrow to discuss the trust fund details, 10 a.m. sharp." No question, no consideration for my grief or my condition. Just an assumption that I would comply. I placed my hand on my belly, feeling the baby's movement beneath my palm. "Your daddy loved you so much," I whispered. "He wouldn't have wanted this for us." But as I lay in bed that night, Margaret's words echoed in my mind. What if David had made arrangements I didn't know about? What if there were legal obligations I wasn't aware of? The uncertainty gnawed at me, mixing with my grief until I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. Margaret arrived at exactly 10 a.m. with a man I didn't recognize, tall, thin, carrying a leather briefcase that screamed expensive legal fees. She didn't knock. She used the spare key David had given her years ago, before we were married. "Chloe, "This is Harold Brennan, our family attorney," Margaret announced, settling into David's favorite chair as if she owned the place. "We thought it best to handle the trust fund matter professionally." Harold Brennan looked uncomfortable, shifting in his seat as he opened his briefcase. "Mrs. Brooks, I want to express my condolences for your loss. However, there are some financial matters that need immediate attention." I remained standing, my hand resting on the kitchen counter for support. Something about this felt wrong, the timing, the formality, the way Margaret watched me with barely concealed triumph. "What kind of matters?" I asked. Harold pulled out a thick folder of documents. "Your late husband established a trust fund 3 years ago, specifically designating it for the care of his parents in their later years. The current value is approximately $285,000. My knees felt weak. That's not what David told me. He said that money was for our child's education. Margaret's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Oh, sweetheart. Men tell their wives many things to keep them happy." David knew where his real responsibilities lay. She leaned forward, her voice taking on a harder edge. "He was raised to understand. That family takes care of family. His parents sacrificed everything for his education, his opportunities. This trust fund was his way of honoring that sacrifice." Harold cleared his throat. "The trust documents are quite specific. They name David's parents as the primary beneficiaries, with provisions for their medical care, living expenses, and—" "I want to see those documents," I interrupted. "Of course," Harold said, though he glanced nervously at Margaret. "However, I should mention that Mrs. Brooks Margaret has already initiated proceedings to access the funds. With David's death, the trust becomes active immediately." The room seemed to tilt. "You're telling me that 3 days after my husband's funeral, you're already moving to take money that was supposed to secure my child's future?" "Your child will be fine," Margaret said dismissively. "You're young, healthy, capable of working. Robert and I are in our 70s. We don't have the luxury of time." She stood up, moving to the window overlooking the garden David had planted. "Besides, this isn't about taking anything from you. This is about David fulfilling his obligations to the people who gave him life." I felt the baby kick hard against my ribs as if responding to my rising anger. David never mentioned any of this to me. We discussed our finances regularly. He showed me our retirement accounts, our savings, our plans for the baby's education. He would have told me about a trust fund this size, would he? Margaret turned back to me, her expression calculating. Or would he have protected you from the burden of knowing about family obligations you couldn't possibly understand? Harold shifted uncomfortably. "Mrs. Brooks, I do need to inform you that there may be some irregularities in the documentation. The signatures on some of the later amendments appear to have been made when David was under considerable stress." Margaret's sharp look silenced him immediately. "What Harold means is that David added some provisions shortly before his death. Natural additions, given his concern for his parents' welfare." My blood ran cold. Provisions added when? David never mentioned meeting with any lawyers recently. "These are complex family matters, Chloe," Margaret said, her tone becoming dangerously sweet. "Perhaps it's best if you don't worry yourself about the details. Pregnancy can be so overwhelming. The important thing is that David's wishes are carried out properly." I looked at Harold, who was studiously avoiding eye contact. "Mr. Brennan, I assume I have the right to contest these documents." "Well, yes, but then I'll need time to review everything with my own attorney." Margaret's composure cracked slightly. "That's unnecessary and expensive. We're family, Chloe. We can handle this reasonably." "Family?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Family doesn't show up 3 days after a funeral with legal papers and predetermined outcomes. Family doesn't manipulate a grieving widow when she's 8 months pregnant. "How dare you?" Margaret began, but Harold placed a restraining hand on her arm. "Perhaps we should give Mrs. Brooks some time to process this information," he suggested diplomatically. After they left, I sat in the silence of my kitchen, staring at the business card Harold had left behind. The trust fund documents lay scattered across the table like evidence of a crime I was only beginning to understand. My hand shook as I reached for my phone. David's voice echoed in my memory. "Chloe, promise me something. If anything ever happens to me, don't let my mother make decisions for you. She means well, but she's never understood boundaries." I thought he was being dramatic. Now I realized he'd been trying to warn me. That night, I couldn't sleep. The baby seemed to sense my agitation, shifting restlessly as I tossed and turned. Finally, at 3 a.m., I made my way to David's home office, a small room at the back of the house that had become his sanctuary. The desk was exactly as he'd left it. Coffee mug with a ring of residue, scattered papers from his marketing job, a framed photo of us from our honeymoon in Santorini. I'd avoided this room since the accident, but now I needed answers. I started with the filing cabinet. Bank statements, insurance papers, tax returns, all the mundane documents of a shared life. But nothing about a trust fund for his parents. David was meticulous about financial records. If he'd established something this significant, there would be documentation. Then I noticed something odd. The bottom drawer of his desk was locked, and I'd never seen David use a key for it. I searched through his desk accessories until I found a small key taped to the underside of his keyboard tray. Inside the locked drawer, I found a leather-bound journal I'd never seen before. The first entry was dated 6 months after our wedding. Mom called again today about money. She's behind on her mortgage and wants me to help. I told her Chloe and I are saving for our own house, but she just laughed and said, "Marriage is temporary. Family is forever." I hate that she makes me feel guilty for having boundaries. My heart clenched. David had never mentioned these conversations to me. I flipped through more entries, each one painting a picture of a man trapped between loyalty and manipulation. Found out Mom's been telling people at church that Chloe and I are struggling financially, and that's why we can't help with Dad's medical bills. The truth is, we offered to help with Dad's prescription costs, but she wanted us to cover the entire bill for his elective surgery. When I said no, she accused me of abandoning my family. Mum showed up at our house today while Chloe was at work. She went through our mail and saw the bank statements. Later, she called and somehow knew exactly how much we had in savings. She said it was selfish to let Dad suffer when we could afford to help, and changing our account numbers tomorrow. The pregnancy announcement should have been one of the happiest days of my life, but Mom's reaction ruined it. Instead of congratulating us, she immediately started talking about how expensive babies are and how we need to prioritize wisely. Then she suggested we move in with her and Dad to save money. When I said no, she got that look, the one that says I'm disappointing her again. My hands trembled as I read entry after entry documenting Margaret's financial manipulation. David had been protecting me from her demands, handling her guilt trips and boundary violations alone. Then I found the entry that made my blood run cold. Mom knows about the education fund I set up for the baby. I don't know how I never told her the amount, just that we were planning ahead. Today she called it David's trust fund and said she hoped I'd remember who raised me when the time came. She's been talking to Dad about their financial security and how children have obligations to their parents. I'm worried she's going to try something if anything happens to me. I need to be clearer about my intentions. I'm going to write a letter to Chloe, explaining everything, and put it with our important documents. If something happens to me, I want her to know that the money I've saved is for her and our child, not for Mum's manipulation schemes. I frantically searched through the drawer, looking for this letter. Instead, I found a draft of what looked like a legal document David's handwriting, but never finalized. To whom it may concern, I, David Michael Brooks, want to make it absolutely clear that any trust fund or savings account established in my name is intended solely for the benefit of my wife, Chloe Brooks, and our children. Under no circumstances should my parents, Margaret and Robert Brooks, be considered beneficiaries of these funds. My mother has a history of financial manipulation, and has repeatedly attempted to guilt me into supporting her irresponsible spending habits. The draft was dated 2 weeks before his death. He'd been planning to make this official. I kept reading, my anger building with each entry. Mom's gambling problem is getting worse. Dad mentions she's been going to the casino 3 times a week, and their savings account is nearly empty. She's been pressuring me to co-sign a loan for them, but I can't risk our financial security for her addiction. She accuses me of being selfish, but I have to protect my family. Chloe doesn't know about the extent of Mum's demands. I've been handling the calls, the guilt trips, the emotional manipulation. But I'm worried about what will happen if something happens to me. Mum has always been possessive, and she's never really accepted Chloe. I need to make sure Chloe knows the truth about our family dynamics. The final entry was dated the day before David's accident. Had another fight with Mom today. She found out about the nursery furniture we ordered and called it extravagant spending. She suggested we buy used items and give her the difference for Dad's dental work. When I refused, she said I was forgetting my roots, and that Chloe had changed me. I told her that Chloe had helped me understand what healthy boundaries look like. She hung up on me. I'm going to call a lawyer tomorrow. I need to make sure everything is legally documented. If anything happens to me, I want Chloe to have every protection possible against Mom's manipulation. My child deserves better than the guilt and emotional blackmail I grew up with. I closed the journal and sat back in David's chair, my mind reeling. He'd been documenting years of financial and emotional abuse, building a case I never knew existed. Margaret's claim about the trust fund wasn't just wrong. It was the continuation of a pattern of manipulation that had tormented David his entire adult life. The baby kicked strongly, and I placed my hand on my belly. Your daddy was trying to protect us, I whispered. And now I know exactly what he was protecting us from. I photographed every page of the journal with my phone, then locked it back in the drawer. Margaret might have legal papers, but I had something more powerful, the truth. In David's own words. The next morning, I called the law firm Harold Brennan had mentioned and asked to speak with anyone else. The receptionist connected. To Patricia Chun, a senior partner specializing in estate law. Mrs. Brooks, I'm so sorry for your loss, Patricia said when I explained my situation. I have to ask, did your husband leave a will? Yes, and I'm the sole beneficiary except for some charitable donations he specified. There's no mention of a trust fund for his parents. That's interesting. May I ask who's representing the opposing claim? Harold Brennan. Patricia's pause was telling. I know Harold. He's competent, but he's also Margaret Brooks' neighbor and golf partner. That's not necessarily a conflict of interest, but it does raise questions about objectivity. We arranged to meet that afternoon. Patricia's office was in a sleek downtown building, all glass and steel, the kind of place that screamed expensive but necessary. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. That immediately put me at ease. Before we discuss your case, I need to run a credit check on the parties involved, Patricia said. Financial disputes often reveal underlying motivations. While she typed, I pulled out my phone and showed her the photographs of David's journal entries. She read in silence, her expression growing more serious with each image. This is extremely valuable documentation, she said finally. Your husband was essentially building a case against financial abuse. These entries establish a pattern of manipulation and coercion. Her computer chimed, and Patricia's eyebrows rose. Mrs. Brooks, I need to show you something. She turned her screen toward me. This is Margaret Brooks' credit report. My mouth fell open. Margaret had 17 credit cards, all maxed out. Her mortgage was 4 months behind. There were liens against her property, collections accounts, and a string of defaulted loans dating back 2 years. The total debt is over $130,000, Patricia said, most of it from cash advances and casino transactions. Casino transactions? Your husband was right about the gambling problem. The pattern suggests a serious addiction, large cash withdrawals. Multiple casinos. Transactions at all hours of the day and night. Patricia pulled up another screen. This is particularly concerning. Margaret attempted to access David's bank accounts 2 weeks before his death. She was denied because she wasn't authorized, but she tried multiple times with different bank representatives. My stomach dropped. She was trying to steal from him while he was alive. It appears so. And there's more. Patricia's fingers flew over the keyboard. I found records of Margaret calling David's employer, claiming to be handling a family emergency and needing information about his benefits and life insurance policies. When, 1 week before his death, the room felt like it was spinning. Are you saying she was planning this before David died? I'm saying she was gathering information about his financial assets while he was still alive. The timing of her legal claim, the specific knowledge of account balances, the prepared documentation, it all suggests premeditation. Patricia leaned back in her chair. Mrs. Brooks, I need to ask you something directly. Are you prepared for a fight? Margaret Brooks is desperate. And desperate. People do desperate things. This isn't just about money. It's about survival for her. She's facing bankruptcy, foreclosure, and possible criminal charges for attempted fraud. Criminal charges? Attempting to access someone else's bank accounts without authorization is a crime. So is forging signatures on legal documents, which I suspect we'll find evidence of once we examine the trust fund paperwork more closely. I thought about David's journal, his final entry about protecting our family. What do I need to do? First, we secure temporary restraining orders preventing Margaret from accessing any of David's accounts or properties. Second, we demand a forensic examination of all the trust fund documents. Third, we build a comprehensive case showing Margaret's pattern of financial manipulation and fraud. Patricia opened a thick folder. I also want to investigate Harold Brennan's role in this. If he prepared documents based on forged signatures or false information, he could face serious professional consequences. How long will this take? Could be months, possibly longer if Margaret decides to fight. And Mrs. Brooks, I need to warn you, this is going to get ugly. Margaret has nothing left to lose, and she's already shown she's willing to manipulate. A grieving widow, she may escalate her tactics. I placed my hand on my belly, feeling the baby's steady movement. Patricia, I need to ask you something. If we win this case, if we prove Margaret was trying to defraud us, what happens to her? She could face criminal charges, restitution requirements, and bankruptcy. Why? Because despite everything she's done, she's still going to be my child's grandmother. I need to know what I'm choosing, justice or family peace. Patricia's expression softened. Mrs. Brooks, you can't have family peace built on a foundation of fraud and manipulation. Your husband spent years trying to protect you from this situation. Honor his wishes by protecting your child from the same cycle of abuse. She handed me a business card. Think about it tonight. Call me tomorrow if you want to proceed. But I'll tell you this, the trust fund documents Margaret presented have signatures that don't match David's handwriting in our database. She's not just claiming money she's not entitled to. She's committed forgery to do it. As I drove home, my phone rang. Margaret's name appeared on the screen. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Chloe dear, I hope you've had time to think about our conversation yesterday. Harold is prepared to expedite the paperwork if you're ready to cooperate. Margaret, I'm going to ask you directly. Did you forge David's signature on any legal documents? The silence stretched so long I thought she'd hung up. Finally, I don't know what you're implying, but I find your tone very concerning. David would be disappointed in how you're handling this situation. David kept a journal, Margaret. I know about the casino visits, the debt, the attempts to access his bank accounts. I know everything. Another long silence. Then her voice turned cold. You have no idea what you're dealing with. Chloe, David was my son long before he was your husband. I won't let you destroy his memory by making false accusations. The line went dead. I sat in my driveway, hands shaking, knowing I'd just declared war on a woman who had nothing left to lose. The next morning, I called Marcus Williams, David's best friend since college. If anyone would know about David's true intentions, it would be Marcus. "Chloe, I've been meaning to call you," Marcus said as soon as he heard my voice. "I've been getting some weird texts from family members asking about David's financial obligations to his parents. What's going on?" I explained the situation, and Marcus's response was immediate and angry. "That's absolute bullshit. David was stressed about his mother's gambling for months. He showed me text messages from her constant demands for money, guilt trips about family duty. He was worried about how it would affect you and the baby." "Do you still have any of those text messages?" "Actually, yeah. David forwarded some to me because he needed someone to talk to. He was really struggling with how to set boundaries without completely cutting off his parents." Marcus arrived at my house an hour later with his laptop. I screenshot everything because I was worried about David's stress levels. "Look at this." He showed me a conversation from 3 months ago. "Margaret, your father's arthritis is getting worse. We need $3,000 for the new treatment." "David, Mom, I already gave you $1,500 for Dad's medications last month. We're saving for the baby's expenses." "Margaret, so you're choosing your unborn child over your father's pain." "David, I'm making responsible, financial decisions. You and Dad have savings." "Margaret had savings." Past tense. Life is expensive, David. I thought I raised you to understand family loyalty. David, I understand manipulation though. "Margaret, how dare you, after everything we've sacrificed for you." Marcus scrolled down. It gets worse. "Look at this one. From last month. Margaret, I know you have a college fund started for the baby. That's money that could help your parents now, not 20 years from now." "David, how do you know about that account?" "Margaret, I'm your mother. I know everything about your life." "David, that's not an answer. How do you know specific details about my finances?" "Margaret, maybe your wife isn't as trustworthy as you think." "She was trying to turn him against you," Marcus said. David was furious. He called me that night and said he was going to change all his passwords and account numbers. I felt sick. "Marcus, what else did he tell you?" "He was planning to cut off financial support completely after the baby was born. He said he couldn't keep enabling her gambling addiction while trying to build a stable life for his family." Marcus closed the laptop. "Chloe, there's something else. David asked me to be the baby's godfather, and he specifically said if anything happened to him, I should make sure Margaret didn't manipulate you into giving her money." He said that. His exact words were, "My mother has spent 40 years perfecting emotional manipulation. Promise me you'll help Chloe see through it if she needs support." My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Chloe, this is David's cousin Sarah. Margaret has been calling family members telling them you're trying to steal money from David's parents. She's organizing people to pressure you into doing the right thing. I thought you should know." Marcus read the message over my shoulder. "Jesus, she's building a campaign against you." Over the next few hours, I received similar messages from 3 other family members. Margaret was systematically contacting everyone in David's extended family, painting me as a greedy widow who was abandoning her husband's elderly parents. But not everyone was buying her story. David's Aunt Lisa called me directly. "Chloe, honey, I want you to know that some of us aren't fooled by Margaret's sob story. She's been borrowing money from family members for years and never paying it back. She owes my sister $2,000 from last Christmas. I had no idea. Margaret is very good at keeping her financial problems compartmentalized. She tells each person a different story about why she needs money, and we never compared notes until now." Lisa's voice hardened. "She borrowed money from David's grandmother's funeral fund 3 years ago. Said it was for Robert's emergency surgery. We found out later she'd spent it at the casino." "Oh my God, there's more." "She's been using David's name to borrow money from family members, claiming he endorsed the loans. She told my daughter that David wanted to help with our mortgage payments and asked her to lend Margaret $5,000 as a family favor. When my daughter called David directly, he had no idea what she was talking about. I felt dizzy. How long has this been going on? Years. Margaret has been living off borrowed money and credit cards, using David's reputation and success to gain credibility. She's desperate now because her sources are drying up. People are starting to talk. That evening, Marcus brought over a bottle of wine-sparkling grape juice for me, and we sat in my living room, planning strategy. "We need to document everything," he said. "Every text message, every phone call, every manipulation attempt. Patricia Chen is right, this is going to get ugly." "I'm scared, Marcus. Not just about the money, but about what this means for my child. Margaret is going to be the baby's grandmother, but she's essentially a stranger to me now." Marcus leaned forward. "Chloe, David loved you more than anything. He chose you over his mother's demands again and again. He'd want you to fight for your child's future. But what if I'm wrong? What if David did promise them something, and I just don't know about it?" Marcus pulled out his phone and showed me one final screenshot. "This is from 2 weeks before the accident. David sent this to me after another fight with his mother." The message read, "I'm done enabling her financial irresponsibility. The money I've saved is for Chloe and our child, period. I'm going to make sure it's legally protected, so Mom can't guilt trip or manipulate her way into it if something happens to me. My kid deserves better than growing up in debt because of grandmother's gambling addiction." I started crying tears of relief, anger, and grief all mixed together. He was trying to protect us. He was. And now it's your turn to protect your child the way he would have. Marcus handed me a tissue. "We're going to fight this, Chloe. You're not alone." My phone buzzed with another text from Margaret. "I hope you're reconsidering your position. Family unity is important, especially for the baby. Children need grandparents who can provide stability and wisdom. Don't let pride destroy what David built." The manipulation was so subtle, so expertly crafted. But now I could see it clearly. The guilt, the threats disguised as concern, the way she positioned herself as the reasonable party. I showed the text to Marcus. "She's good at this. She's had decades of practice." But David saw through it. "And now you can too." He stood up. "Tomorrow, we take all this evidence to Patricia Chen. It's time to go on the offensive." As Marcus left, I realized something had shifted. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was honoring David's memory by refusing to let his mother destroy what he'd worked so hard to build and protect. The stress was taking its toll. I'd been having irregular contractions for 2 days, and my blood pressure was elevated at my routine appointment. Dr. Martinez, my obstetrician, was concerned enough to order immediate monitoring. "Mrs. Brooks, I need you to understand that stress can trigger premature labor," she said, as the nurses hooked me up to monitors. "At 8 months, the baby would likely be fine, but we want to avoid any complications if possible." I was lying in the hospital bed, watching the baby's heartbeat on the monitor, when Margaret walked into the room uninvited. "Chloe dear, I heard you were having some difficulties. I hope you're not letting this legal nonsense affect your health." She set down a bouquet of flowers, the kind you buy at the hospital gift shop, and settled into the visitor's chair as if she belonged there. "Margaret, I'm trying to rest. The doctor said stress is bad for the baby." Exactly my point. She leaned forward, her voice taking on that familiar tone of false concern. "This whole situation is unnecessary. You're putting yourself and David's child at risk over money that was never really yours to begin with." My blood pressure monitor started beeping. A nurse appeared immediately, checking the numbers with a frown. "Mrs. Brooks, your pressure is ever spiking. Is everything okay?" I looked at Margaret, who was watching the monitor with undisguised interest. "I need some privacy, please." "Of course, Mrs. Brooks, Margaret Brooks. I'm the baby's grandmother." Margaret's smile was syrupy sweet. "I'm here to provide support during this difficult time." The nurse looked between us, clearly sensing tension. I'll be right outside if you need anything. As soon as we were alone, Margaret's demeanor shifted. Chloe, look at yourself. You're in the hospital because you're too stubborn to accept reality. Is this what David would want? His child endangered because his wife is having delusions about money. Delusions? My voice was sharper than I intended. David was a good son. He understood family obligations. This fantasy you've created about him choosing you over his parents is just that, a fantasy. Margaret stood up, moving closer to the bed. You've been married what? 3 years. I raised him for 32 years. I know who he really was. The monitor beeped again. I felt the baby moving restlessly, responding to my elevated stress. David kept a journal, Margaret. I know about the casino debt, the manipulation, the attempts to access his accounts. I know everything. Margaret's mask slipped for just a moment, and I saw something dangerous in her eyes. You think you know everything, but you don't understand the full picture. David was conflicted about many things. Grief can make people misinterpret situations. You saying David was lying in his own private journal? And saying people write things when they're angry that they don't really mean. David was frustrated with our financial situation, but he never stopped loving his parents. Margaret sat back down, her voice becoming calculated. You know what I think? I think you're an unfit mother. The words hit me like a physical blow. What did you say? Look at yourself, Chloe. You're in the hospital because you can't handle stress. You're so obsessed with money that you're willing to endanger your pregnancy. What kind of mother puts legal battles ahead of her child's well-being? The blood pressure monitor started a steady alarm. I couldn't breathe properly, couldn't think past the rage that was building in my chest. David would be ashamed of you, Margaret continued. He'd be horrified to know that his wife cared more about money than his child's health. Maybe the courts need to know about your priorities. Get out. My voice was barely a whisper. What? Get out of my room. Get out now. Margaret stood up slowly, her smile triumphant. I'll be praying for you, Chloe. And for David's baby. I hope you come to your senses before it's too late. She left just as Dr. Martinez and 2 nurses rushed in, alerted by the monitors. Mrs. Brooks, we need to get your blood pressure down immediately. What happened? I couldn't speak. The combination of rage, fear, and exhaustion had left me speechless. Dr. Martinez ordered medication and extended bed rest. I'm admitting you overnight for observation, she said. The contractions are stronger, and your blood pressure is dangerously high. We need to monitor the baby closely. That night, alone in the hospital room, I realized the full scope of what I was facing. Margaret wasn't just trying to steal money. She was trying to destroy my credibility as a mother. Her threats about the courts, her implications about my fitness as a parent, her timing of the confrontation during a medical emergency, it was all calculated. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Heard you're in the hospital. On my way. When he arrived, he took one look at my face and understood. What did she do? I told him about Margaret's visit, her threats, her implications about my parenting abilities. Marcus's expression grew darker with each detail. She's escalating because she knows she's losing, he said. The legal case is falling apart, so she's trying to attack your character instead. What if she's right, though? What if fighting this is putting the baby at risk? Chloe, listen to me. You're not the problem here. Margaret is the one creating stress, making threats, and manipulating the situation. Fighting to protect your child's inheritance isn't putting the baby at risk. It's securing the baby's future. Dr. Martinez appeared in the doorway. Mrs. Brooks, I need to speak with you privately. Marcus squeezed my hand. I'll be right outside. After he left, Dr. Martinez sat down beside my bed. I've been thinking about what happened today. The timing of your blood pressure spike, the severity of your stress response. It's not normal pregnancy anxiety. Are you being threatened or intimidated by someone? I hesitated, then told her about Margaret's visit and the ongoing legal battle. Mrs. Brooks, I need to document this in your medical records. Harassment during pregnancy can have serious consequences for both mother and child. If this person continues to create stress during your pregnancy, I may need to recommend legal intervention. Legal intervention, a restraining order. Your health and your baby's health are my priority. If someone is deliberately causing you stress during this vulnerable time, that's a form of abuse. The word abuse hit me like a revelation. I'd been thinking of Margaret's behavior as manipulation, but Dr. Martinez was right. It was abuse. Emotional, financial, and now medical abuse. Doctor, if I get a restraining order, will that affect custody issues after the baby is born? That's not my area of expertise, but I can tell you that courts take documented harassment of pregnant women very seriously. Your medical records will show the pattern of stress and its impact on your pregnancy. After Dr. Martinez left, I lay in the dark hospital room, feeling the baby's movements gradually settle into a calmer rhythm. For the first time since David's death, I felt a spark of real anger, not just grief or confusion, but clear, focused rage. Margaret had made a critical mistake. She'd threatened not just me, but my unborn child. And that was a line she should never have crossed. Patricia Chun was furious when I told her about Margaret's hospital visit. That's harassment, intimidation, and possibly witness tampering. She's trying to force you into compliance by threatening your health and your child's well-being. We were in her office the day after my hospital discharge, and Patricia was already on the phone with someone. James, I need you to start immediately. Full background investigation, financial records, witness interviews, everything. She hung up and turned to me. I'm bringing in a private investigator. James Rodriguez is the best in the city for financial crimes and family law cases. Is that necessary? Chloe, Margaret crossed a line when she threatened you in the hospital. She's escalating because she's desperate, and desperate people make mistakes. We need to document every mistake she's made. James Rodriguez arrived an hour later, a quiet man in his 50s with the kind of eyes that missed nothing. He had a reputation for uncovering financial fraud that law enforcement couldn't touch. Mrs. Brooks, I've already started preliminary research based on what Patricia told me. Your mother-in-law has been very busy. He opened a thick folder. Let's start with the casino records. The printouts were staggering. Margaret had been gambling at 3 different casinos over the past 2 years, with losses totaling over $60,000. The timestamps showed she was there during the day, the evening, weekends. It was a full-time addiction. She's been funding this habit through cash advances on 17 different credit cards, James continued. But here's where it gets interesting. She's also been using fake identification to open accounts. Fake identification? She's been using variations of her name and David's previous addresses to establish credit. Margaret Brooks, Maggie Brooks, M. Brooks, all linked to addresses where David lived during college and early in his career. Patricia leaned forward. That's identity theft. Gets worse. She's been using David's social security number to run credit checks on herself, claiming she's verifying family financial information. She's also been intercepting mail at your current address. My blood ran cold. What mail? Bank statements. Mostly. Your mail carrier identified her from a photo. She's been telling them she's David's mother, and that you're too grief-stricken to handle the mail properly. Can she do that? No. Mail theft is a federal crime. James pulled out another set of documents. She's been using information from your stolen mail to make fraudulent claims about your financial situation. Remember when she knew the exact amount? In your savings account. She had your bank statements. Patricia was taking notes furiously. This is criminal behavior, not just civil fraud. There's more. She's been calling David's former employers, claiming to be handling his estate, and trying to get information about his benefits and insurance policies. She's also contacted your insurance company, claiming to be your mother-in-law handling medical claims. She's been impersonating me. Not exactly, but she's been using her relationship to David to gain access to information she has no legal right to. She's been building a comprehensive picture of your financial situation for months. James turned to the next section of his report. Here's the most damaging evidence. She's been forging David's signature on documents for over a year. He showed me photocopies of various papers, loan applications, credit card applications, even a mortgage refinancing document. All had David's signature, but they were clearly forgeries. How can you tell? Handwriting analysis. David's real signature has specific characteristics. The way he dots his I's, the angle of his letters, the pressure patterns. These forgeries are good, but they're not perfect. She's been practicing, though. The earlier forgeries are cruder than the recent ones. Patricia examined the documents. These loan applications are all for amounts that David never received. Where did the money go? Casino deposits, credit card payments, cash advances. She's been using David's credit rating and identity to fund her gambling addiction. For how long? Based on the paper trail, at least 18 months, maybe longer. I felt sick. David never knew. I think he suspected something. The credit monitoring alerts would have gone to his email, and there are records of him calling credit agencies to dispute charges. But Margaret was clever, she was. Using his identity for applications that were denied, so no money actually changed hands. It looked like clerical errors or identity theft attempts. James pulled out a final folder, but this is the smoking gun. 2 weeks before David's death, Margaret attempted to take out a home equity loan using David's house as collateral. My house. Your house. She forged both David's signature and yours on the application. When the lender called to verify, David answered and shut it down immediately. But Margaret had already started the paperwork for the trust fund claim. Patricia stood up, pacing behind her desk. She knew David was onto her. She knew he was going to cut her off financially and possibly press charges, so she accelerated her timeline. You think she was planning this before David died? I think she was planning to steal from him, whether he was alive or dead. His death just changed her strategy. James nodded. The trust fund documents Harold Brennan presented, they're forgeries too. But sophisticated ones. She's been working on this for months. Can we prove it? Absolutely. I have handwriting samples, financial records, witness testimony from bank employees who remember her suspicious behavior. She's committed multiple felonies. Patricia sat back down. James, I need you to prepare a comprehensive report for the police. This isn't just estate fraud. It's identity theft, mail fraud, and conspiracy to commit financial fraud. Already in progress. I'll have everything ready by tomorrow. As James packed up his files, I realized the scope of what Margaret had done. She hadn't just tried to steal from me. After David's death, she'd been systematically defrauding him for over a year, using his identity and reputation to fund her gambling addiction. Patricia, what happens to Harold Brennan if he knowingly used forged documents? He could face disbarment, criminal charges, and civil liability. But if he was duped by Margaret's forgeries, he might cooperate with our investigation to save his own career. And Margaret? She's facing serious prison time. Federal mail fraud alone carries a 20-year maximum sentence. Add in the identity theft, the forged documents, and the conspiracy charges, and she could be looking at decades in prison. I placed my hand on my belly, feeling the baby kick. I never wanted this to destroy David's family. Chloe, you're not destroying anything. You're exposing crimes that have been going on for years. David was a victim too. He just didn't live long enough to see the full scope of his mother's betrayal. That night, I sat in David's office, looking at his journal entries with new understanding. He hadn't just been dealing with emotional manipulation. He'd been the victim of systematic financial fraud. His stress, his worry about protecting our family, his plans to seek legal protection, it all made sense now. Margaret wasn't just a desperate gambling addict. She was a criminal who had been using her own son's identity to fund her addiction. And when he died, she'd simply transferred her criminal focus to me and our unborn child. But now I had evidence. and I had allies. And I had something Margaret had never counted on: the fierce protective instincts of a mother who would do anything to protect her child's future. The call came at 7 a.m. on a Tuesday. Robert's voice was shaky, barely above a whisper. "Chloe, I need to see you. Alone, please." "Robert, I know what Margaret's been doing. I know about the forgeries, the gambling, all of it. I can't stay silent anymore." We met at a small cafe downtown, far from Margaret's usual haunts. Robert looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past month, hollow-eyed, shoulders hunched, hands trembling as he stirred his coffee. "I should have stopped her years ago," he said without preamble. "I should have protected David from her, and I should have protected you, but I was a coward." "Robert, what's going on?" He reached into his jacket and pulled out a sealed envelope. "I wrote this last night. It's everything I know about Margaret's financial crimes, going back to when David was in college." I stared at the envelope. "You knew?" I suspected. "Then, I knew. Then I enabled her because I didn't know how to stop her without destroying our family." Robert's voice cracked. "But there's no family left to destroy. She's done that herself." He told me about finding gambling receipts in Margaret's purse 3 years ago, about confronting her and being told it was just recreational fun, about discovering maxed-out credit cards hidden in her sewing box, about her explanations that they were temporary solutions to cash flow problems. She said David was helping with the payments, that he'd agreed to cover her debts until she got back on her feet. I believed her because I wanted to believe her. "When did you realize she was lying?" "When David called me 6 months ago, furious that Margaret had been using his name to borrow money from his cousins. He said he'd never authorized any loans and that he was tired of cleaning up her messes." Robert's hands shook as he opened the envelope. That's when I started paying attention. The handwritten pages contained a detailed timeline of Margaret's escalating fraud. Robert had been documenting everything: dates, amounts, suspicious conversations, lies that didn't add up. "She forged your signature on that home equity loan application," he continued. "I saw her practicing writing both your name and David's, claiming she was helping with some surprise paperwork for your anniversary. You saw her practicing forgeries. I didn't realize that's what it was at the time. She said she was planning to surprise you with a vacation booking and needed to practice signing for both of you." Robert's laugh was bitter. "I was so stupid." "Robert, why are you telling me this now?" "Because last night she asked me to lie for her in court. She wants me to testify that David promised to take care of us financially, that he'd discussed setting up a trust fund for our retirement." Robert looked directly at me for the first time. "She wants me to commit perjury to help her steal from my grandson." I felt the baby kick, as if responding to the conversation. "What did you tell her?" I told her I couldn't lie under oath. She said if I didn't support her, she'd leave me and I'd lose everything. Robert's voice dropped to a whisper. Then she said something that made me realize how dangerous she's become. "What did she say?" "She said, 'Robert, Chloe is weak and grieving. She won't fight hard enough to protect that money. But I will. I've been fighting for this family's survival for years. And I'm not going to let David's naive little wife destroy everything I've built." The coldness in Margaret's words, as reported by Robert, sent chills down my spine. "She's not going to stop, is she?" "No. She's convinced herself that she's the victim here, that David betrayed her by choosing you over family loyalty. She's rewritten history in her mind. She's the wronged mother fighting for justice, not the criminal who's been stealing from her own son." Robert reached across the table and took my hand. "Chloe, I'm going to testify for you. I'm going to tell the court everything I know about Margaret's gambling, her debts, her forgeries. I'm going to make sure my grandson's future is protected. Robert, if you do that, Margaret will never forgive you. I know that David will never forgive me if I don't." His eyes filled with tears. "I failed my son by not protecting him from his mother's manipulation. I won't fail my grandson." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of his decision settling between us. "What will you do? Where will you go?" "I'm moving in with my sister in Oregon. I've already started packing." "Margaret doesn't know yet." Robert stood up, looking suddenly lighter despite the sadness in his eyes. I'm 73 years old, Chloe. I don't have many years left, but I want to spend them with a clear conscience. Robert, I'm sorry. I never wanted to break up your family. Honey, you didn't break up anything. Margaret did that years ago with her lies and her gambling and her manipulations. You're just the first person strong enough to stand up to her. After Robert left, I sat in the cafe reading his detailed account. Page after page of documented fraud, manipulation, and financial abuse. Margaret had been stealing from David for years, using Robert's silence and complicity to cover her tracks. Robert's testimony would change everything. A co-conspirator willing to testify against Margaret would destroy her credibility completely. More importantly, it would give me the evidence I needed to protect Emma's inheritance. That evening, my phone rang. Margaret's voice was ice cold. Robert tells me you met with him today. I want you to know that turning a husband against his wife is despicable, even for you. Margaret, I didn't turn anyone against anyone. Robert made his own decision. Robert is confused and frightened. He's been manipulated by your lawyers and your lies. But I want you to understand something, Chloe. I am not giving up. I will fight for what's rightfully mine until my last breath. What's rightfully yours? Money you stole. Inheritance you forged. Documents to claim? I am David's mother. I gave birth to him, raised him, sacrificed everything for him. You were just his wife, a temporary attachment he would have outgrown eventually. The cruelty of her words took my breath away. Margaret, David loved me. He chose me. David chose you because he didn't know better. He was young and confused by infatuation. But family is forever, Chloe. Blood is forever. And my grandson will know the truth about his father's real loyalties. Your grandson will know the truth about his grandmother's criminal behavior. Margaret's laugh was sharp and bitter. We'll see about that. Robert may have abandoned me, but I have other allies. Other people who understand family loyalty. The line went dead. I sat in my living room, holding the phone, realizing that Robert's defection had only made Margaret more dangerous. She wasn't just fighting for money anymore. She was fighting for her version of reality. Her twisted narrative where she was the victim, and I was the villain. But I had Robert's testimony now. I had evidence of Margaret's crimes. And I had something else, the growing certainty that protecting Emma from Margaret's toxicity was worth any price I had to pay. The war was far from over, but the battle lines were finally cleared. At 38 weeks pregnant, I was scheduled for my final prenatal appointment before Emma's birth. The legal battle was reaching its crescendo, but my body was focused on more immediate concerns. The baby was dropping lower. My contractions were becoming more frequent, and Dr. Martinez was talking about delivery timelines. Everything looks good, Mrs. Brooks. The baby is in perfect position, and your blood pressure has stabilized since we got the stress situation under control. Dr. Martinez made notes in my chart. Are you ready for this? I wasn't sure if she meant the birth or everything else, but my answer was the same. As ready as I can be. The ultrasound screen showed Emma's profile, David's nose, my stubborn chin, perfect and whole and real. In less than 2 weeks, she would be here, and all. The legal battles would become about something tangible rather than abstract. Dr. Martinez, I need to ask you something. The baby's grandmother has been difficult. Is there a way to prevent her from being at the hospital during delivery? Absolutely. You can specify exactly who's allowed in your room and who isn't. Hospital security will enforce those restrictions. She looked at me seriously. Are you concerned about harassment during delivery? I'm concerned about a lot of things. Mrs. Brooks, labor and delivery are intensely vulnerable times. Your only focus should be on bringing your baby safely into the world. Anyone who creates stress or anxiety during that process is not welcome, regardless of their relationship to you. I left the appointment feeling both excited and terrified. Emma was coming soon, and I still didn't know how the legal battle would resolve. Would she be born into a world where her inheritance was secure? Or would she grow up in the shadow of her grandmother's legal manipulations? That afternoon, Patricia called with an update. The forensic analysis of the trust fund documents is complete. They're definitely forgeries, and we can prove it. Harold Brennan is cooperating fully. He's claiming he was duped by Margaret's false documents and is willing to testify against her. That's good news, right? It's great news legally. But Chloe, I need to warn you about something. Margaret has filed a petition for grandparents' rights. She's claiming that as the baby's grandmother, she has a legal right to visitation and input on major decisions. My blood ran cold. Can she do that? She can file the petition, but it's unlikely to succeed given the documented harassment and criminal behavior. However, she's also claiming that your mental state makes you an unfit parent. My mental state? She's using your hospitalization for pregnancy complications as evidence that you're emotionally unstable and unable to handle the stress of parenting. She's filed medical records requests and is claiming that the baby would be better off with significant grandparent involvement. I felt the baby kick hard against my ribs as if responding to my rising anxiety. Patricia, what does this mean? It means she's escalating to custody issues. She's not just trying to steal Emma's inheritance, she's trying to establish legal rights to Emma herself. Can she win? Not with the evidence we have. But she can make the process extremely stressful and expensive. And Chloe, there's something else. We've discovered that Margaret has been taking photos of your house, your car, and your daily activities. She's been building a case file about your fitness as a parent. I sat down hard on my couch. She's been stalking me? It appears so. James Rodriguez found evidence that she's been documenting your activities, your visitors, your medical appointments. She's been building a narrative that you're isolated, unstable, and unprepared for motherhood. But that's not true. We know that. But Margaret is crafting a story for the courts. She's claiming that David would want his parents involved in raising his child, that you're preventing the baby from having a relationship with David's family, and that your irrational behavior regarding the trust fund demonstrates poor judgment. Felt a contraction starting, not painful, but strong enough to make me pause. Patricia, what if she's right? What if I'm too emotional, too stressed to be a good mother? Chloe, listen to me. You're not the problem here. You're a woman who lost her husband and is being systematically harassed and manipulated by someone with documented criminal behavior. Your emotional responses are completely normal. But what if the courts don't see it that way? They will. We have Robert's testimony, James's investigation, medical records documenting Margaret's harassment, and now evidence of stalking. No reasonable judge would grant custody rights to someone with this pattern of behavior. After I hung up, I walked through my house, seeing it through Margaret's eyes. She'd been watching me, documenting my life, looking for evidence of instability. The irony wasn't lost on me. Her stalking behavior was creating the very stress she was using as evidence against me. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Heard about the grandparents' rights petition. Don't panic, we're going to fight this. But I was panicking. In less than 2 weeks, Emma would be born, and Margaret would have a legal relationship to her that I couldn't completely sever. Even if I won the financial battle, the custody issue would continue indefinitely. That evening, I was sorting through baby clothes when my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Margaret standing on my porch, holding what looked like a legal document. I almost didn't answer, but something about her posture, defeated rather than aggressive, made me reconsider. Margaret, what do you want? I want to talk to you, woman to woman, mother to mother. She held up the document. This is my grandparents' rights petition. I haven't filed it yet. Patricia told me you already filed it. I filed a preliminary inquiry. This is the full petition. Margaret's voice was different, tired, less manipulative. I want to make you an offer. Against my better judgment, I opened the door. Margaret looked terrible, thin, aged, with the hollow-eyed look of someone who hadn't slept in days. I'll withdraw the petition and drop the trust fund claim, she said, but I want something in return. What? I want to be part of my grandson's life. Not custody, not decision-making power, just access, visits, phone calls. The chance to know David's child. I stared at her. You want me to trust you with my child after everything you've done? I want you to give me the chance to be a better grandmother than I was a mother. Margaret's voice cracked. I know I've made mistakes, Chloe. I know I've hurt people. But that baby is all I have left of David. Margaret, you've been stealing from David for years. You've been stalking me, harassing me, trying to steal from my child. Why would I trust you now? Because I'm desperate enough to be honest. She sat down heavily on my porch step. I have a gambling problem. I've had it for years. I've been stealing and lying and manipulating people to feed that addiction. I destroyed my relationship with David, and I'm destroying my relationship with Robert. Are you asking me to enable your addiction? I'm asking you to give me a chance, to get help. I'm asking you to let me know my grandson while I still can. I felt another contraction, stronger this time. Margaret, I can't have this conversation right now. I'm going into labor soon, and I know, that's why I'm here. I don't want my grandson to be born into a war between his mother and grandmother. Margaret stood up, holding out the petition. Take this. Think about it. If you can find a way to let me be part of his life-supervised visits, whatever you think is safe, I'll sign whatever agreements you want. And if I can't, then I'll file the petition, and we'll let the courts decide. But I'm hoping you'll give me one chance to be the grandmother David would have wanted for his child. After Margaret left, I sat in my living room, holding the unfiled petition. The woman who had been tormenting me for weeks was offering to surrender, but only if I agreed to let her into Emma's life. I thought about David's journal entries, his descriptions of his mother's manipulation and boundary violations. I thought about Robert's testimony, James's investigation, and all the evidence of Margaret's criminal behavior. But I also thought about Emma, growing up without her father, and whether she deserved the chance to know her grandmother, a reformed, supervised, legally constrained version of Margaret. As I felt another contraction building, I realized I had less than 2 weeks to decide not just Emma's financial future, but the shape of her entire family legacy. The contraction started at 3 a.m. on a Thursday, 5 days before my due date. I'd been having false labor for a week, but these were different, regular, intense and impossible to ignore. By 6 a.m., I was in the car with Marcus, heading to the hospital. Did you call Patricia? Marcus asked as we navigated morning traffic. Yes, and Dr. Martinez. They know Margaret isn't allowed in the delivery room or recovery. I gripped the door handle as another contraction peaked. Marcus, what if something goes wrong? Nothing's going wrong. You're about to meet your daughter. The hospital admission process was a blur of forms, monitors, and medical questions. Dr. Martinez confirmed I was in active labor, 6 centimeters dilated and progressing quickly. We're looking at a delivery sometime this afternoon, she said. The baby's heartbeat is strong, and everything looks normal. I was settled into the delivery room when the nurse informed me that someone claiming to be the baby's grandmother was in the waiting room, demanding to see me. I specified that Margaret Brooks is not allowed in my room, I said through gritted teeth as another contraction hit. I'll handle it, Marcus said, leaving to deal with Margaret. He returned 20 minutes later looking grim. She's not alone. She brought Robert and Harold Brennan, and she's claiming she has legal rights to be here for the birth. What did you tell her? I told her to wait in the parking lot if she wanted, but she's not getting past security. Marcus pulled out his phone. But Chloe, there's something else. She's been calling news stations, claiming this is a story about grandparents' rights being violated by a vindictive daughter-in-law. Even in labor, Margaret's manipulation took my breath away. She's trying to turn this into a media circus. Patricia is handling it. She's also got a process server standing by to deliver a restraining order if Margaret tries to interfere with the birth. The labor progressed quickly. By 2 p.m., I was fully dilated and ready to push. Dr. Martinez positioned herself at the foot of the bed, and the delivery nurses took their places. "Okay, Chloe, with the next contraction, I want you to push as hard as you can." The pain was unlike anything I'd ever experienced, but it was purposeful pain bringing Emma into the world. Between contractions, I found myself thinking about David, wishing he could be here to hold my hand and meet his daughter. "I can see the head," Dr. Martinez announced. "One more push should do it." Emma arrived at 2:47 p.m., screaming and perfect. 7 pounds, 2 ounces, with David's dark hair and what looked like my stubborn chin. The moment they placed her on my chest, everything else, the legal battles, Margaret's manipulation, the financial stress faded into background noise. "She's beautiful," Marcus said, tears streaming down his face. David would be so proud. Dr. Martinez was completing the delivery when a nurse appeared in the doorway. "Mrs. Brooks, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a situation in the hallway. The woman claiming to be the grandmother is demanding to see the birth certificate, and she's becoming disruptive." My peaceful moment shattered. Even in the delivery room, Margaret was finding ways to create chaos. "Call security," Dr. Martinez said firmly. "This patient is not to be disturbed." "Already done." "But she's claiming she has legal documents giving her rights to information about the baby." I looked down at Emma, who was sleeping peacefully against my chest. "She's not even an hour old, and Margaret is already trying to stake a claim." Marcus stepped out to handle the situation while I was moved to a recovery room. When he returned, his expression was dark. "Margaret tried to get into the nursery. She told the staff she was here to verify the baby's welfare and that she had concerns about your fitness as a mother." "Did they let her in?" "Hell no. But she's filed some kind of emergency petition claiming the baby might be in danger due to your mental state during delivery." I felt like I was in a nightmare. "She's using my labor as evidence against me." "Patricia is already on it. She's getting the emergency petition dismissed, and she's filing charges for harassment and disruption of medical care." A nurse brought Emma back from her initial checkups, perfectly healthy, all reflexes normal, ready to go home in 24 hours. As I held her, I realized that the birth certificate in my hands was more than just a document. It was legal proof of Emma's identity and my sole parental rights. "Marcus, I need you to make sure this birth certificate is secured. I don't want Margaret to have any opportunity to tamper with it or make copies." "Already handled." Patricia arranged for the hospital to flag Emma's records as confidential due to ongoing legal issues. That evening, as I nursed Emma for the first time, I felt a mix of overwhelming love and protective fury. This tiny person was entirely dependent on me, and I was determined that she would never experience the manipulation and emotional abuse that had defined David's relationship with his mother. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Congratulations on the birth of David's son. I hope you'll reconsider your position on family involvement. Children need grandparents, especially when they've lost a parent. I'm prepared to take this matter to court if necessary." The text was from Margaret, and she'd assumed Emma was a boy. She didn't even know her own granddaughter's gender, but she was already making legal threats. I showed the text to Marcus. "She's not going to stop, is she?" "No. But look at what you're fighting for." He gestured to Emma, who was sleeping peacefully in my arms. "She's worth every battle." As I held my daughter, I realized that everything had changed. This wasn't just about money or legal documents anymore. It was about protecting Emma from a woman who saw her as a possession to be claimed rather than a person to be loved. Margaret had made her choice when she tried to disrupt Emma's birth with legal manipulations and media attention. Now I would make mine, though Emma was 6 days old when James Rodriguez called with the news that would change everything. "Chloe, I need you to sit down. We've uncovered something that makes Margaret's previous crimes look like parking tickets." I was in the nursery, Emma sleeping in my arms, when he arrived with Patricia and a thick folder of documents. The exhaustion of new motherhood made everything feel surreal. But James's expression was deadly serious. We've been investigating Margaret's financial activities more deeply, and we found something disturbing. She's been embezzling from David's accounts for over 2 years. He showed me bank records I'd never seen before, transfers from David's business accounts to various shell companies, all traced back to Margaret. How much? I asked. $47,000. She's been siphoning money from David's freelance marketing business, using his corporate account access to make unauthorized transfers. Patricia leaned forward. But that's not the worst part. She's also been intercepting and cashing checks made out to David's business. Insurance payments, client payments, tax refunds. She's been stealing his mail and depositing the money into accounts she controlled. David never knew. He suspected something. Look at this. James showed me a series of emails between David and his business bank, questioning unauthorized transactions and missing deposits. He was trying to track down the missing money. But Margaret was covering her tracks by forging his signature on explanatory documents. I felt sick. She was stealing from him while he was alive. For years. And when he started getting suspicious, she accelerated her timeline. The trust fund scheme wasn't her first attempt to steal from David. It was her backup plan when the embezzlement became too risky. Emma stirred in my arms, and I looked down at her perfect, innocent face. She stole from her own son to feed her gambling addiction. Gets worse, James continued. We found evidence that she's been using David's identity to take out loans, apply for credit cards, and even attempt to refinance his mortgage. She's been running a comprehensive identity theft operation. Patricia pulled out another folder. The forensic accountant's report shows that Margaret has stolen over $80,000 from David over the past 3 years. Combined with her credit card fraud and the forged documents, she's committed multiple felonies. What about Harold Brennan? He's cooperating fully, claims he had no idea the trust fund documents were forged, and he's provided evidence that Margaret misrepresented the situation to him. He's agreed to testify against her in exchange for immunity. James opened his laptop and showed me a spreadsheet. But here's the smoking gun. Margaret has been planning this for months. We found records of her researching estate law, probate procedures, and grandparents' rights. She's been building a strategy to claim David's assets since before he died. She was planning to steal from him whether he lived or died. Exactly. His death just changed her tactics, not her goals. Patricia stood up and walked to the window. Chloe, I need to prepare you for what's coming. This isn't just a civil case anymore. We're looking at criminal charges, mail fraud, identity theft, embezzlement, conspiracy to commit fraud. Margaret could be facing 20 years in federal prison. What does that mean for Emma? It means Margaret's grandparents' rights petition is dead in the water. No court will grant custody or visitation rights to someone facing multiple felony charges. But even as relief washed over me, I felt a strange sadness. Emma would never know her paternal grandmother, not because of my choices, but because Margaret had chosen criminal behavior over family relationships. There's something else, James said. We found evidence that Margaret has been systematically defrauding other family members too. She's been using David's name and reputation to borrow money from relatives, claiming he endorsed the loans. How many people? At least 12 family members, totaling over $30,000 in fraudulent loans. She's been running a family-wide con game for years. Patricia returned to her seat. James, show her the recordings. Recordings? James pulled out a small device. Margaret has been leaving threatening voicemails on your phone and Patricia's office line. Some of these messages could be classified as criminal threats. He played back Margaret's voice. Chloe, you have no idea what you're dealing with. I've been protecting this family for decades, and I won't let David's naive little wife destroy everything I've built. If you think you can keep me away from my grandson, you're going to learn how wrong you are. Another message. I know where you live. I know your schedule, and I know you're all alone with that baby. Accidents happen to people who don't understand family loyalty. Emma started crying as if responding to the menace in Margaret's voice. I held her closer, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. She's threatening us? She's threatening you, the baby, and anyone who supports you. We've documented over 20 threatening messages in the past week. Patricia's expression was grim. Chloe, I'm recommending that you get a restraining order immediately. Margaret's behavior is escalating, and she's becoming dangerous. What about Robert? Robert is cooperating fully. He's provided financial records, witness statements, and he's willing to testify about Margaret's criminal behavior. He's also asking for police protection. He's afraid of what Margaret might do when she realizes he's working with us. I looked down at Emma, who had settled back into sleep. She's 6 days old, and she's already living in the shadow of her grandmother's crimes. No, Patricia said firmly. She's living under her mother's protection. You're doing what David would have wanted, protecting your daughter from a dangerous person who happens to be related to her. James packed up his files. The police are issuing arrest warrants tomorrow morning. Mail fraud, identity theft, embezzlement, and criminal threats. Margaret will be in custody within 24 hours. And then what? Then you and Emma can finally live in peace. The trust fund will be secure, the inheritance will be protected, and Margaret will face the consequences of her choices. After they left, I sat in the quiet nursery, processing everything I'd learned. Margaret hadn't just been trying to steal from Emma, she'd been systematically defrauding David for years, using his love and trust to fund her addiction and her lifestyle. Emma opened her eyes and looked at me with that unfocused newborn gaze. Your daddy tried to protect us, I whispered. He knew something was wrong, and he was trying to keep us safe. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Just heard the news. Justice is coming. David would be proud of how you've protected Emma. As I held my daughter, I realized that the financial battle was almost over. But the emotional healing for me, for Emma, for David's fractured family was just beginning. The knock on my door came at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday. I was nursing Emma when I saw the official-looking woman through the peephole, clipboard in hand. Mrs. Brooks? I'm Sarah Chan from Child Protective Services. I'm here to investigate a report of potential child endangerment. My blood ran cold. I'm sorry, what? We received a report that there may be unsafe conditions in the home for a newborn infant. May I come in? I knew immediately who had made the report, but I invited Sarah in anyway. Emma was 2 weeks old, healthy and gaining weight perfectly. Our home was clean, safe, and filled with baby supplies. Sarah looked around the living room, taking notes. Mrs. Brooks, I need to ask you some questions about your living situation and support system. Of course, the report claims that you're experiencing severe emotional distress, that you've been involved in contentious legal battles, and that you may not be able to provide stable care for your infant. I felt anger rising in my chest. Who made this report? I can't disclose the reporter's identity, but I can tell you that the person claims to be a concerned family member with intimate knowledge of your situation. Margaret Brooks, David's mother. Sarah's expression didn't change. Mrs. Brooks, I need to see the baby's living conditions, medical records, and evidence of appropriate care. For the next hour, Sarah conducted a thorough investigation. She examined Emma's nursery, reviewed medical records from Dr. Martinez, checked our food supply, and asked detailed questions about my support system and financial situation. Mrs. Brooks, I can see that your daughter is healthy, well cared for, and living in a safe environment. However, I am concerned about the report of ongoing legal stress and potential harassment. What kind of concerns? The reporter claimed that you're being threatened by family members, and that this situation might compromise your ability to care for your child. I realized that Margaret had twisted the truth. She was the one creating the threats and stress, but she'd reported it as if I was the unstable party causing problems. Sarah, I need to show you something. I retrieved the folder of evidence Patricia had given me, documentation of Margaret's criminal behavior. threatening messages and harassment. Sarah read through the documents, her expression growing more serious. Mrs. Brooks, this appears to be a case of harassment and intimidation, not child endangerment. The person who made this report seems to be the source of the stress they're reporting. Margaret Brooks has been arrested for fraud, identity theft, and criminal threats. She's been stalking me and harassing me throughout my pregnancy and after the birth. I see that, Mrs. Brooks. I'm going to close this case as unfounded. However, I'm also going to flag your file to prevent further false reports from being taken seriously. Can she keep doing this? She can keep making reports, but they'll be screened more carefully now. And Mrs. Brooks, I'm going to recommend that you document every contact or attempted contact from this person. If she continues to harass you, it will strengthen any restraining order proceedings. After Sarah left, I called Patricia immediately. She's escalating because she knows she's about to be arrested, Patricia said. The CPS report is a desperate attempt to create evidence of your unfitness as a parent. Can she win custody this way? Not with the evidence we have. But Chloe, I need to warn you, CPS reports can be used in custody proceedings, even if they're unfounded. Margaret is trying to create a paper trail that makes you look unstable. What do? We accelerate our timeline. I'm filing for an emergency restraining order today, and we're going to get a court date for the trust fund case within the week. That afternoon, Marcus came over to help me prepare for what Patricia was calling the final battle. He found me in the nursery, holding Emma and crying. She's trying to take my baby, I sobbed. She's using the system against me. Hey, look at me. Marcus sat down beside me. Emma is healthy, loved, and safe. You're an excellent mother. Margaret's desperation is showing she's making increasingly irrational moves because she knows she's lost. But what if the courts believe her? What if they think I'm unstable? Then we show them the evidence. We show them Margaret's criminal record, her financial fraud, her harassment campaign. We show them that you're the victim here, not the perpetrator. My phone rang. Patricia's name appeared on the screen. Chloe, I have news. Margaret was arrested this morning on federal charges. She's being held without bail pending arraignment. She's in jail. She's in jail. The threatening messages, the false CPS report, the harassment, it was all enough to convince the judge that she's a flight risk and a danger to witnesses. I felt a wave of relief so intense it made me dizzy. What happens now? Now we wait for her arraignment. But Chloe, I need to prepare you for something. Margaret's lawyer is going to argue that she's a desperate grandmother being denied access to her grandchild. They're going to paint you as vindictive and her as a victim. Even with all the evidence, especially with all the evidence. The more trouble Margaret is in, the more sympathetic her lawyer will try to make her appear. Emma started fussing, and I adjusted her position to nurse. Patricia, I need to ask you something. If Margaret goes to prison, what happens to her parental rights regarding Emma? She doesn't have parental rights. She's a grandparent. But if she's convicted of felonies, especially crimes involving fraud and threats against you, any future grandparents' rights claims would be denied. And if she's not convicted, then we have a longer fight ahead of us. But Chloe, with the evidence we have, conviction is almost certain. After I hung up, I sat in the rocking chair David had assembled for the nursery, holding Emma and thinking about the future. Margaret was in jail, facing serious criminal charges, but the emotional damage was already done. Emma would grow up knowing that her paternal grandmother had tried to steal from her and threaten her mother. That evening, Robert called. His voice was shaky but determined. Chloe, I heard about Margaret's arrest. I want you to know that I support the charges completely. What she did was criminal, and I should have stopped her years ago. Robert, I'm sorry this happened to your family. My family is you and Emma now. Margaret chose her path. He paused. I'd like to visit sometime if that's okay with you. I want to be a good grandfather to Emma, if you'll let me. I'd like that. I also want you to know that I'm testifying for the prosecution. Margaret's lawyer has been calling me, trying to convince me to support her, but I won't lie for her anymore. As I put Emma to bed that night, I realized that the immediate crisis was over. Margaret was in jail, the legal threats were neutralized, and Emma's inheritance was secure. But the real work healing from the trauma, building a healthy family structure, and protecting Emma from future manipulation was just beginning. For the first time since David's death, I felt like I could breathe freely. Emma was safe, and I was finally strong enough to protect her from anyone who might try to hurt her. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, but the weight of what was happening made it feel immense. Margaret sat at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit, her lawyer a harried-looking public defender shuffling through papers with obvious desperation. Judge Williams, a stern woman in her 60s, reviewed the case files with methodical precision. This is the matter of the estate of David Michael Brooks, specifically regarding the contested trust fund and allegations of fraud. Patricia squeezed my hand. Remember, you're not on trial here, Margaret is. The prosecutor assistant, District Attorney Rebecca Martinez, opened with a clear and damning summary. Your Honor, this case involves a systematic campaign of fraud, identity theft, and harassment perpetrated by the defendant against her own son and his widow. Margaret's lawyer, John Hendricks, stood to object. Your Honor, my client is a grieving mother who has been denied access to her grandchild and excluded from her son's estate. The allegations against her are exaggerated, and, Mr. Hendricks, Judge Williams interrupted, your client has been charged with multiple felonies. This is not a family dispute, it's a criminal matter. The first witness was James Rodriguez, the private investigator. He methodically presented evidence of Margaret's crimes, forged signatures, stolen mail, unauthorized bank access, and documented threats. The defendant engaged in a pattern of financial fraud spanning over 2 years. James testified. She stole approximately $80,000 from her son through various schemes, including embezzlement, mail fraud, and identity theft. Hendricks cross-examined aggressively. Mr. Rodriguez, isn't it true that families often have informal financial arrangements? Maybe David voluntarily helped his mother with expenses. David's own journal entries document his objections to his mother's financial demands. He specifically wrote about feeling manipulated and stolen from. But you can't prove he didn't change his mind, can you? James pulled out a folder. Actually, I can. David changed all his passwords and account numbers 2 weeks before his death, specifically to prevent his mother from accessing his finances. The courtroom murmured. Margaret's face remained impassive, but I could see her hands trembling. Next, Robert took the stand. He looked frail but determined as he was sworn in. Mr. Brooks, you were married to the defendant for 47 years. Did you witness any of the alleged financial crimes? Robert's voice was steady. Yes, I saw Margaret practicing forging signatures. I saw her intercepting mail. I saw her gambling away money she'd stolen from David. Why didn't you report these crimes? Because I was scared of her. Margaret is very skilled at emotional manipulation. She convinced me that helping her cover up her crimes was the same as protecting our family. Hendricks stood up. Mr. Brooks, isn't it true that you've been coerced into testifying against your wife by the plaintiff's lawyers? No one coerced me. I'm testifying because I want my grandson to have a chance at a normal life, something David never had because of his mother's manipulation. The most damaging testimony came from Harold Brennan, the lawyer who had originally presented Margaret's trust fund claim. Mr. Brennan, did you know the trust fund documents were forged when you presented them to Mrs. Brooks? Absolutely not. Margaret told me that David had established the trust fund for his parents' care, and that she had the original documents. When I discovered the forgeries, I immediately contacted the authorities. How did you discover they were forged? The signatures didn't match samples in David's legal file. When I confronted Margaret about the discrepancies, she claimed David had been under stress when he signed them, and that his handwriting might have been affected. Did you believe that explanation? Not when I saw the extent of the forgeries. David's signature was forged on at least 12 different documents, all supposedly signed on different dates. The handwriting analysis showed they were all done by the same person at the same time. When it was Margaret's turn to testify, she took the stand with a defiant expression. Hendricks tried to paint her as a desperate grandmother, but the evidence was overwhelming. Mrs. Brooks, did you forge your son's signature on trust fund documents? David always intended to take care of his parents. He told me so many times. That's not what I asked. Did you forge his signature? Margaret's composure cracked. I did what I had to do to protect my family. David was being manipulated by his wife. He wouldn't have wanted his parents to suffer. So you admit to forging the documents? I admit to carrying out David's true wishes, which his wife was preventing me from doing. The prosecutor pounced. Mrs. Brooks, you've just admitted to forgery under oath. Are you also admitting to the mail theft, the identity theft, and the embezzlement? I never stole anything that wasn't rightfully mine. David owed his parents for everything they'd sacrificed for him, including the money you took from his business accounts without his knowledge. David would have given me that money if I'd asked. I just saved us both the awkwardness of the conversation. Judge Williams leaned forward. Mrs. Brooks, are you saying you took money from your son's accounts without his permission? I'm saying I took money that morally belonged to me anyway. The courtroom fell silent. Margaret had essentially confessed to multiple crimes while trying to justify them. Patricia whispered to me. She's destroying her own case. The cross-examination continued for another hour, with Margaret becoming increasingly defensive and contradictory. She admitted to accessing David's mail, to using his identity for credit applications, and to threatening me when I refused to cooperate with her schemes. Mrs. Brooks, you left threatening voicemails for the plaintiff, correct? I left messages explaining the situation and trying to make her understand family obligations. You said, and I quote, I know where you live. I know your schedule, and I know you're all alone with that baby. Accidents happen to people who don't understand family loyalty. Do you consider that an explanation? Margaret's face flushed. I was upset. I said things I shouldn't have said. You threatened a new mother and her infant child because she wouldn't give you money you weren't entitled to. I threatened no one. I was trying to make her understand the consequences of her selfish behavior. Judge Williams had heard enough. Mrs. Brooks, step down. In her closing statement, the prosecutor was devastating. Your Honor, the defendant has admitted to forgery, theft, mail fraud, and making criminal threats. She has shown no remorse for her actions and continues to justify criminal behavior as family loyalty. The evidence is overwhelming, and the defendant's own testimony confirms her guilt. Hendricks made a last-ditch effort. Your Honor, my client is a desperate woman who made poor choices while grieving her son's death. She deserves compassion, not imprisonment. Judge Williams deliberated for less than 10 minutes. The defendant is found guilty on all charges. The evidence of premeditation, the systematic nature of the crimes, and the defendant's lack of remorse warrant the maximum sentence allowed by law. Margaret's composure finally broke completely. She began screaming about injustice and family betrayal as the bailiffs led her away. Sentencing is scheduled for next month, Judge Williams announced. The court also grants the plaintiff's request for a permanent restraining order and orders the defendant to pay full restitution. As we left the courthouse, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief and justice. Emma's inheritance was secure. Margaret could never legally threaten us again. And the truth about David's relationship with his mother was finally on the record. But more than that, I felt like I'd honored David's memory by protecting the family he tried so hard to build and defend. 3 days after the trial, Patricia called with news that would change everything I thought I knew about David's final weeks. Chloe, we found something while going through David's computer for the restitution hearing. There's a video file dated 2 days before his death. You need to see this. She arrived at my house that afternoon with her laptop and a tissue box. I watched it first to prepare you. It's It's David talking directly to you and Emma. My hands shook as Patricia opened the file. David's face appeared on screen, sitting in his home office late at night. He looked tired but determined. Hi, sweetheart. If you're watching this, it means something happened to me, and you're dealing with my mother's manipulation. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you from this, but I want you to know the truth about everything. I started crying immediately. Hearing David's voice, seeing his face, it was like having him back for just a moment. Chloe, my mother is not who she appears to be. She's been stealing from me for years, and I've been trying to figure out how to handle it without destroying our family. But I realized now that she's the one who destroyed our family, not me. David held up a folder of documents. I've been documenting everything, the forged signatures, the stolen mail, the unauthorized bank access. She's been using my identity to fund her gambling addiction, and when I started changing passwords and account numbers, she got desperate. Yesterday, she called me and said she knew about the education fund we set up for the baby. She said she hoped I'd remember my obligations when the time came. I told her that money was for our child, not for her gambling debts. She got angry and said some things I can't repeat. David's expression hardened. She said that if anything happened to me, she'd make sure you understood family priorities. She implied that she'd find a way to get to that money whether you cooperated or not. That's when I knew I had to make this video. I paused the recording. Overwhelmed by emotion, Patricia handed me tissues. There's more. He talks about his plans to protect you and Emma. I resumed playing the video. David leaned closer to the camera. Chloe, I want you to know that every penny I've saved is for you and our baby. The education fund, the life insurance, the house, everything is yours. Under no circumstances should my mother have access to any of it. I know she's going to try to guilt you into giving her money. She's going to say I promised to take care of her and Dad, that I had obligations to family. It's all lies. I never promised her anything, and I've been trying to cut off her access to our finances for months. David stood up and walked to his desk. I'm going to put this video with our important documents. If something happens to me, I want you to show it to anyone who questions my intentions. I want Emma to grow up knowing that her father chose her future over his mother's manipulation. He sat back down, his expression becoming tender. Chloe, I love you more than I've ever loved anyone. You saved me from a toxic family dynamic that was destroying me. You showed me what healthy love looks like, what boundaries mean, what it feels like to be chosen rather than manipulated. If you're watching this, you're probably scared and grieving and feeling alone. But you're stronger than you know, and you're not alone. Marcus will help you, and you'll find other people who understand what you're going through. David paused, collecting his thoughts. I want to tell you about my childhood, about what it was like growing up with Margaret as a mother. She's always been manipulative, but it got worse after I became financially successful. She started viewing me as a resource to be exploited rather than a son to be loved. The guilt trips, the emotional manipulation, the way she'd turn family members against each other, it was constant. Dad enabled it because he was afraid of her anger. I enabled it because I didn't know how to set boundaries without feeling like I was abandoning family. But when I met you, I started to understand the difference between love and manipulation. You never made me feel guilty for having boundaries. You never tried to control me through emotional blackmail. You just loved me for who I was. David's voice became stronger. I don't want Emma to grow up the way I did. I don't want her to think that family means accepting abuse disguised as love. That's why I'm fighting to protect her inheritance, and that's why I need you to be strong enough to continue that fight if I can't. The video continued for another 10 minutes, with David detailing specific instances of Margaret's manipulation, her financial crimes, and his growing awareness of the extent of her betrayal. He talked about changing his will, about setting up legal protections, and about his plans to confront her directly. I'm going to call a lawyer tomorrow, David said. I'm going to make sure everything is legally documented so there's no question about my intentions. I'm also going to tell Mom that I know about the stealing and that it has to stop. My heart clenched. David had been planning to confront Margaret the day after he made this video, the same day he died in the car accident. Chloe, if you're watching, it means I didn't get the chance to have that conversation. But I want you to know that I was ready to cut ties with my mother completely if necessary. Protecting you and Emma was more important to me than preserving a relationship built on lies and manipulation. David looked directly into the camera. I want Emma to know that her father loved her before she was even born. I want her to know that I worked hard to give her a secure future. And I want her to know that family isn't just about blood, it's about love, respect, and healthy boundaries. The video ended with David saying, "I love you both more than words can express. Be strong, be brave, and don't let anyone make you feel guilty for protecting our daughter. You're going to be an amazing mother, and Emma is lucky to have you." I sat in stunned silence as the screen went dark. Patricia reached over and closed the laptop. "He knew," I whispered. "He knew exactly what Margaret was planning to do. He was trying to protect you from this exact situation." The video is dated 48 hours before his death, which means he'd been planning to take legal action against his mother. Do you think Margaret knew he was planning to expose her? Patricia's expression was troubled. I don't know. But the timing is suspicious. David dies in a car accident, just days before he's scheduled to meet with lawyers about his mother's criminal behavior. Are you suggesting Margaret had something to do with David's death? I'm not suggesting anything. But I'm saying that Margaret had motive to prevent David from exposing her crimes. The police report on the accident said David's car had brake failure, but it was assumed to be mechanical failure. The possibility that Margaret might have somehow caused David's death was too horrifying to contemplate. But the timing, the motive, the fact that she'd been planning to steal from him, whether he was alive or dead, it raised questions I wasn't sure I wanted answered. Patricia, should we ask the police to reopen the investigation into David's death? That's your decision. But I will say that this video provides clear evidence of motive and opportunity. Margaret knew David was about to expose her, and she had the mechanical knowledge to tamper with a car. Mechanical knowledge? She worked as a mechanic's assistant for 15 years before she married Robert. She knows cars. I felt sick. The possibility that Margaret had killed David to prevent him from exposing her crimes was almost too much to bear. I need to think about this, I said. I need to decide whether Emma should grow up knowing that her grandmother might have killed her father. Chloe, whatever you decide, this video changes everything. It's David's own words, his own testimony about his mother's crimes and his intentions for his family. It's the most powerful evidence we could have. After Patricia left, I sat in the nursery, holding Emma and trying to process what I'd learned. David had known exactly what was going to happen, and he tried to prepare me for it. His video was like a message from beyond the grave, giving me the strength and evidence I needed to protect our daughter. But it also raised the terrifying possibility that Margaret hadn't just stolen from David, she might have killed him too. Cover up her crimes. I looked down at Emma, sleeping peacefully in my arms. "Your daddy loved you so much," I whispered. "He did everything he could to protect you, even when he knew it might cost him everything." That night, I made my decision. I would not ask the police to reopen the investigation into David's death. Whether Margaret had killed him or not, she was already facing justice for her crimes. Emma deserved to grow up knowing her father as a man who loved her, not as a victim of murder. But David's video would be preserved, along with all the other evidence of Margaret's manipulation and fraud. Someday, when Emma was old enough to understand, she would know the truth about her father's courage and her grandmother's crimes. For now, it was enough to know that David had seen this moment coming and had given me everything I needed to protect our child. His love was stronger than Margaret's manipulation, and his preparation had made Emma's future secure. The truth was finally revealed, and it was exactly what I'd known in my heart all along. David had chosen us over his mother's toxic demands, and he died trying to protect us from her crimes. Margaret's sentencing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in October, Emma was 2 months old, healthy and alert, when Patricia and I walked into the courthouse for what would be the final chapter of our legal battle. "She's asked to speak with you privately before the sentencing," Patricia said as we waited in the hallway. "Her lawyer says she wants to apologize." I don't believe that for a second. Neither do I, but the request is allowed under victim impact procedures. You don't have to agree to it. I thought about David's video, about his warnings about Margaret's manipulation, about everything she'd put us through. Actually, I think I do want to hear what she has to say. But I want it recorded, and I want you present. An hour later, I sat across from Margaret in a small conference room adjacent to the courtroom. She looked older, diminished by her time in jail. Her orange jumpsuit hung loose on her frame, and her usually perfect hair was unkempt. "Chloe, thank you for agreeing to see me." Margaret's voice was different, softer, less manipulative. "I know I've done terrible things. I know I've hurt you and David and Robert. Is this the part where you apologize and ask for forgiveness?" "No, I'm not going to insult your intelligence with fake remorse." Margaret leaned forward. "I'm going to tell you the truth for once in my life. I wasn't prepared for honesty from." "Margaret, I'm listening." "I've been addicted to gambling for 15 years. It started as entertainment, but it became an obsession. I lost our retirement savings, our emergency fund, everything Robert and I had worked for." "So you started stealing from David?" "I started borrowing from David. At least that's how I justified it to myself. I told myself I was just taking advances on money that would eventually be mine anyway." Margaret's hands shook as she continued. "When David started questioning the missing money, I got desperate. I thought if I could just win big once, I could pay everything back and no one would know. But you didn't win big. I lost bigger, $70,000 in 3 months. Money I'd stolen from David's business accounts. Money from credit cards I'd opened in his name. Money from loans I'd taken using his identity. I felt disgusted but also oddly relieved to finally hear the truth." "When did you decide to forge the trust fund documents?" "When I realized David was going to cut me off completely. He'd changed all his passwords, closed the accounts I had access, and he was asking questions about transactions I couldn't explain." Margaret's voice dropped to a whisper. "I knew he was planning to expose everything. I could see it in his eyes, the disappointment, the anger, the decision to protect his family from me. So you decided to steal from his widow and unborn child. Instead, I decided to take what I needed to survive. I told myself the money was family money anyway, that David would want his parents taken care of. But you knew that was a lie." Margaret was quiet for a long moment. "Yes, I knew it was a lie. David had made his priorities clear you, and Emma came first, and I came not at all." "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I want you to understand something. I'm not a victim here. I'm not a grieving mother who made mistakes. I'm a criminal who systematically betrayed her own son's trust and then tried to victimize his widow." I stared at Margaret, trying to process this unexpected honesty. "What do you want from me?" "I want you to make sure Emma knows the truth about not sanitized stories about a grandmother who made mistakes, but the real truth. I want her to know that her father was a good man who protected his family from a toxic person." "Why would you want that?" "Because Emma deserves better than the lies I told David his whole life. She deserves to grow up with clear boundaries and healthy relationships. She deserves to know that her father chose her over his mother's manipulation." Margaret reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This is a letter I wrote to Emma. I want you to give it to her when she's old enough to understand." I took the letter, unsure whether to trust anything Margaret was giving me. "It's not an apology," Margaret continued. "It's a confession. It tells her exactly what I did, why I did it, and why her father was right to protect her from me." "Margaret, why are you doing this?" "Because I'm facing 8 years in prison, and I'm 71 years old. I may not survive to see Emma grow up, but if I do, I want her to know who I really am so she can make informed decisions about whether to have a relationship with me." And if she chooses not to, then she'd be making the same choice her father made, protecting herself from someone who hurt people she loved. I looked at this woman who had terrorized me for months, who had stolen from her own son, who had threatened me and my baby. For the first time, I saw something other than manipulation in her eyes, genuine remorse and acceptance of consequences. Margaret, do you expect me to forgive you? I expect you to protect Emma from anyone who might hurt her, including me. I expect you to honor David's memory by giving your daughter the secure, loving childhood he never had. And the money? The trust fund was never mine, was never meant for me. I stole it from Emma's future, and I deserve every consequence I'm facing. Margaret stood up, preparing to leave. Chloe, I need to tell you one more thing. David's accident, the brake failure, it wasn't caused by mechanical problems. My blood ran cold. What are you saying? I'm saying I had opportunity and motive, and I know how to sabotage a car. I'm saying the timing was very convenient for me. Did you kill your own son? Margaret met my eyes directly. That's something I'll have to live with for the rest of my life, and something you'll have to decide whether to pursue. She knocked on the door, signaling the end of our conversation. As the bailiff led her back to the courtroom, I sat alone with the weight of her confession and the terrible possibility that Emma's grandmother had murdered her father. But I also sat with the knowledge that Margaret had finally told the truth, had finally acknowledged the full scope of her crimes, and had given me permission to protect Emma from her toxicity. The final confrontation was over, but the questions Margaret had raised would haunt me forever. Judge Williams' gavel came down, with finality at 2:47 p.m. on October 15th. The defendant is sentenced to 8 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. The court also orders full restitution of $87,000 to the victim's estate. Margaret showed no emotion as the sentence was read. She stood straight, accepting the consequences of her crimes with the same dignity she'd shown during our private conversation. Additionally, Judge Williams continued, the court grants a permanent restraining order preventing the defendant from contacting the victim's family, including any future attempts to establish grandparental rights. Patricia squeezed my hand. It's over, Chloe. Emma's inheritance is secure, and Margaret can never legally threaten you again. As Margaret was led away in handcuffs, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Relief that the legal battle was finished. Sadness that Emma would never know her paternal grandmother in any positive way. And a lingering unease about Margaret's implied confession regarding David's death. Robert was waiting in the hallway, tears streaming down his face. I'm sorry, he said. I'm sorry I didn't stop her years ago. I'm sorry David had to live with this, and I'm sorry you had to fight this battle alone. You're not alone anymore, I replied. We're going to be okay. What happens now? Now we focus on Emma. We give her a stable, loving home where she doesn't have to worry about manipulation or financial insecurity. Robert nodded. I'd like to be part of that, if you'll let me. I want to be the grandfather David would have wanted for his daughter. 3 weeks later, the financial aspects of the case were resolved. Emma's trust fund was officially established with ironclad legal protections. The education fund David had started was supplemented with the restitution money Margaret was required to pay. Even accounting for legal fees, Emma would have over $300,000 for her future. Patricia presented me with a thick folder of documents. Emma's inheritance is now completely secure. The trust fund is managed by an independent trustee, and the money can only be used for education, healthcare, and other approved expenses. What about the house? Our other assets? All protected? Margaret has no claim to any of it, and the restraining order prevents her from even attempting to contact you about financial matters. I looked at the legal documents that had cost me months of stress and thousands in legal fees. Was it worth it? Chloe, look at what you've accomplished. You've protected Emma's future, exposed Margaret's crimes, and ensured that she can never manipulate your family again. David would be proud. That evening, I sat in the nursery with Emma, reading her the letter Margaret had written. It was brutally honest, a detailed confession of her crimes, her motivations, and her acknowledgement that David had been right to protect his family from her. "When you're old enough to understand this," I said to Emma, "you'll know that your father loved you enough to fight for your future. And you'll know that sometimes protecting the people you love means making difficult decisions about family." Emma looked up at me with David's eyes, and I felt the weight of responsibility, not just for her financial security, but for her emotional well-being, her understanding of healthy relationships, and her ability to set boundaries with people who might try to manipulate her. Marcus visited that weekend, bringing takeout and moral support. "How are you feeling about everything?" he asked as we watched Emma sleep, relieved, sad, angry, grateful. I paused, considering my words. I keep thinking about David's video, about how he knew this was coming and tried to prepare me for it. He did prepare you. You fought for Emma's future and won. But Marcus, there's something else. Margaret implied that she might have caused David's accident. She said the brake failure wasn't mechanical. Marcus set down his coffee. "Are you going to pursue that?" "I don't know. Part of me needs to know the truth. But another part of me thinks Emma deserves to grow up believing her father died in an accident, not that he was murdered by her grandmother." "What do you think David would want?" I thought about his video, his emphasis on protecting Emma from his mother's toxicity. I think he'd want Emma to be safe and happy. I think he'd want her to know she was loved, not that she was orphaned by a criminal. Then you have your answer. 6 months later, I received a letter from Margaret in prison. It was brief. "Chloe, I hope you and Emma are well. I've been attending addiction counseling and taking responsibility for my actions. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know that I'm using this time to become a better person. If Emma ever wants to know about her father's family history, I've written detailed accounts of our family's medical history and David's childhood. It's the only gift I can give her now. Thank you for protecting her from me when I couldn't protect her from myself." I showed the letter to Patricia, who advised me to keep it but not respond. Margaret is serving her sentence, and she's acknowledging her crimes. That's justice. As I put the letter away, I realized that justice wasn't just about punishment. It was about protection, truth, and the chance for healing. Margaret was facing consequences for her actions. Emma's future was secure, and I had the strength to build the kind of family David had always wanted. The legal battle was over, but the real victory was just beginning, raising Emma in an environment of love, security, and healthy boundaries, free from the toxic patterns that had defined David's childhood. Justice had been served, but more importantly, Emma's future had been protected. Emma's first birthday fell on a crisp April morning, exactly 18 months after David's death. I woke up to her babbling in her crib, sunlight streaming through the nursery windows he'd painted himself before she was born. "Good morning, birthday girl," I whispered, lifting her into my arms. She had his smile now, unmistakable and radiant. House was filled with friends and chosen family: Marcus, Patricia, Robert, and several couples from my new mother's group. The dining room table groaned under the weight of gifts and a homemade cake decorated with Emma's favorite colors. "Look at this," Marcus said, showing me a photo on his phone. Emma's first steps, captured for posterity. She'd taken those steps 3 days ago, walking straight from my arms to Robert's waiting embrace. Her grandfather had cried openly, and I'd realized in that moment that healing was possible, even from the deepest wounds. "She's got David's determination," Robert said, bouncing Emma on his knee. "Once she sets her mind to something, nothing stops her." Robert had become the grandfather Emma deserved, patient, loving, and completely devoted to making up for the chaos Margaret had created. He'd moved back from Oregon and bought a small house 10 minutes away, close enough to be involved but far enough to respect boundaries. "Chloe, this came for you," Patricia said, handing me an official-looking envelope. "It's from the prison." My stomach clenched. Margaret had been writing regularly, but I'd stopped reading her letters months ago. This envelope was different, thicker, with legal markings. What is it? Open it and find out. The letter was from Margaret, but it wasn't what I expected. Chloe, I'm writing to inform you that I've signed papers relinquishing any future claims to grandparental rights. I've also established a small trust fund for Emma's education, using money I earned from prison work programs. It's not much, $3,000, but it's clean money. Earned honestly. I want Emma to have something from me that isn't tainted by theft or manipulation. I've also completed addiction counseling and will be entering a halfway house program next year. I don't expect to be part of Emma's life, but I want her to know that her grandmother finally learned to make healthy choices. Give her my love, and tell her that her father was the best part of me. I read the letter twice, feeling a mixture of surprise and cautious hope. Margaret was keeping her word, taking responsibility for her actions, and giving Emma the space to grow up without toxic influences. What do you think? I asked Patricia. I think people can change, but they have to prove it over time. Margaret is saying the right things, but actions matter more than words. And if she maintains this behavior, if she truly gets her life together, then maybe, when Emma is older, she can decide for herself whether to have a relationship with her grandmother. But that's Emma's choice to make, not yours. As the party continued around us, I found myself thinking about how much had changed. A year ago, I'd been fighting for Emma's financial future and protection from Margaret's manipulation. Now, Emma was walking, laughing, and surrounded by people who loved her unconditionally. The trust fund David had established was growing steadily, managed by professionals who understood its importance. Emma would have options: college, graduate, school, starting a business, buying a home. She'd never have to worry about financial insecurity the way David had worried about his mother's debts. Auntie Chloe, called Sarah, my 4-year-old neighbor, running up with a handful of dandelions. These are for Emma. I smiled at the title. Sarah's family had become like relatives to us, the kind of chosen family that fills the gaps left by biological relatives who can't or won't fulfill their roles. Emma, look what Sarah brought you, I said, helping Emma hold the flowers. Emma clapped her hands and laughed, completely delighted by the simple gift. In that moment, I saw David's joy, his ability to find happiness in small things, reflected in our daughter's face. As the afternoon wound down and guests began to leave, I found myself in the kitchen with Robert, cleaning up wrapping paper and cake plates. She's happy, he said, watching Emma play with her new toys. David would be so proud of the life you've built for her. We've built for her, I corrected. You've been an amazing grandfather, Robert. I had to be. I couldn't let my grandson grow up thinking all her father's family was toxic. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Margaret's letter, are you going to keep it? I'm going to put it with the others. Someday, when Emma's old enough to understand, she can read them and decide for herself what they mean. And if she wants to meet Margaret, then I'll support her decision. But I'll also make sure she understands the history, the patterns, and the importance of healthy boundaries. That evening, after Emma was asleep, I sat in David's office with the photo album I'd been creating, pictures of Emma's first year. Milestones, family moments, and memories of her father. The first photo was from the hospital. Emma just hours old, wearing the tiny hat David had picked out months before his death. The most recent was from today, Emma taking her first steps toward the camera, arms outstretched and face lit with joy. Between those photos was the story of our survival, our healing, and our triumph over circumstances that could have destroyed us. Emma had grown up surrounded by love, security, and the knowledge that her father had fought for her future. I opened David's journal one more time, reading his final entry. I'm going to make sure it's legally protected so Mom can't guilt trip or manipulate her way into it if something happens to me. My kid deserves better than growing up in debt because of grandmother's gambling addiction. Mission accomplished, I whispered, closing the journal. Emma's future is secure, and she's surrounded by people who will never let her doubt that she's loved. As I prepared for bed, I reflected on the journey we'd taken. From grief and betrayal to justice and healing. From financial uncertainty to rock-solid security. From isolation to a community of chosen family. Emma had lost her father, but she'd gained something invaluable, the knowledge that love means protection. That family means healthy boundaries, and that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the freedom to grow up without toxic influences. The legal battle was over. Margaret's manipulation was neutralized, and Emma's inheritance was secure. But more importantly, Emma was thriving in an environment where she'd never have to question whether she was valued for herself or for what she could provide to others. David's love had created a foundation strong enough to withstand Margaret's attempts to destroy it. And now Emma would grow up knowing that her father had chosen her future over his mother's demands, the greatest gift any parent could give. In the quiet of that anniversary night, I finally felt the peace David had tried to secure for us. We'd survived, we'd thrived, and we'd honored his memory by building the kind of family he'd always dreamed of, one built on love, respect, and unshakable boundaries. Emma's future was bright, her inheritance was protected, and her mother had learned that sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to enable toxic behavior, even when it comes from family. The fight was over. The future had begun.